Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bear Down Ballers on the field of 68. I'm Ryan Wall, joined as always by Jordan Pollock and Jordan, Arizona. As we know, as we broke down the other day on our last episode, that Arizona is coming off of their biggest win of the season. They beat number three Iowa State by 11 points in overtime at the McCall Center, and this team is rolling. They've won three straight, 7-1 in January, as we know. But now their next game will be played in February, the second to last month of the regular season, and they're going to be in Tempe to face the Arizona State Sun Devils in a big rivalry matchup. The game's taking place at 11 a.m. local time, 1 p.m. on the East Coast. It's on CBS national TV. How are you doing today? And what are your first thoughts about this huge matchup this Saturday?
I'm doing well, and I think a lot of it is going to be determined just by the fact it's a rivalry. I think from the outside, from looking at the numbers, from looking at the common opponents and who they've played, who they've beaten, I think on paper it looks like Arizona should be close to a double-digit favorite in this game. But just the fact that it's one of the oldest rivalries between two in-state universities in the country, I think I think it'll be a close game. I expect it to be probably right at three possessions by the time the game ends, if not even inside of three possessions.
I'll give my prediction in a couple of minutes, but first, this it's kind of a weird type of rivalry because yes, Arizona State did have two wins, and won two straight against Arizona a couple years ago, but Arizona's really dominated this matchup recently. They won four straight at in Tempe, and they've won seven of the last eight matchups overall. So this is really a one-sided rivalry. Arizona State hasn't shown a lot recently against Arizona, but this team is they do have some good freshmen. They have Josa Sozhan from Arizona State. He was a guy that Arizona wanted, Sohan, but Arizona couldn't really get him. And he's looked pretty good this year. He's banged up. He came back two games, averaging over 11 a game, but their veterans, BJ Freeman leads the team over 12 and a half a game. And they got Adam Miller, who is another veteran, and he's had 15 plus the last two. Looked good. And yeah, as you mentioned, they're coming off of a win against Colorado, but they've also won two of three. They beat West Virginia just like Arizona did. So this is also a big game for them because they lost four straight before they beat West Virginia. And in this crazy Big 12, you know, if you fall behind, it's really hard to catch up later in the season.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And especially when it's kind of getting to the point of the season where the quad one and the quad two games are starting to get stacked up and teams' resumes are getting built. And a team like ASU that has that ranked win at the time when West Virginia was ranked in Morgantown. Outside of that, right now they've got some losses to good teams, but they don't really have much. So I expect them to throw pretty much everything they can at Arizona because they're getting to the point of being pretty desperate and just trying to get some quality wins stacked up.
Yeah, you were talking about you think this game could get out of hand as you see it, and I kind of agree. I think the spread on this game, as we're recording this on late Thursday night, there's not a spread out, obviously. Normally don't come out until at least a day beforehand or more. But yeah, I expect this game to be probably a 10-point spread, maybe a little under that just because it's in Tempe. But yeah, Arizona, they're clicking on all cylinders. Caleb Love is coming off of one of the best, I mean, moments of his entire career, best Arizona moment. And Awaka, as we've mentioned, is really rounding into form. And when you have that, along with guys like KJ Lewis and the freshman Carter Bryant, this team is just so hard to beat. And I'm not going to say Arizona can't lose this game because we saw some crazy endings. We saw buzzer beaters against Arizona by Arizona State in the last 5 years. Anything's possible, but I would be pretty shocked if Arizona lost this game just based on how they've looked lately.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm excited for the atmosphere. I'm actually was able to get some tickets, and I'll be attending. I'll be right across from their bench, watching the game. I'm excited for the atmosphere because the Arizona basketball fandom has really traveled well. They've even nicknamed it McHale North at times. So I'm excited to see the traveling support that Arizona is going to have for this game and just the atmosphere that's going to be surrounded. I think it's going to be a hot environment for both teams. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I've been to some of those Arizona State rivalry games in the past. They're always a fun time, always a great atmosphere. I mean, we've seen Arizona fans. Arizona fans are everywhere in the Big
yep.
12. Now they're in Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. They travel everywhere. So when it's only about an hour and a half up the road, there's going to be a lot of Wildcat fans in attendance. My final prediction for this game, I think Arizona's going to win this game by 12 points, if I had to say, because I value Arizona's experience factor. They just look better as a team lately, and this Arizona State team, I just don't think they have enough. I think they're really weak in the front court, so I think watch out there. I think if Arizona can exploit that with Toby Awaka and Vasar and Carter Bryant getting some minutes and Townsend, I really think Arizona will break this game open.
Yeah, I completely agree with you with the front court. And I think the shooting is going to be pretty important in this game. I think if Arizona shoots, I think any kind of somewhat efficiently, I think they could blow this game open pretty quickly and really not really give the lead back. But I think they're kind of due for kind of a poor efficient night. And like I said, just the rivalry. I think ASU is going to throw any kind of look that they've got in their arsenal at them. I expect Arizona to win right inside of 10 points. I think they'll win by 9.
Yeah, so we're right there close to each other with our predictions. As we've mentioned, this is one of the most storied rivalries in the country. The hatred for both schools is, it's very hard to find. There's only a couple examples of it in the entire college basketball landscape today. This game
Especially
should,
every sport. I think
yeah,
that's one thing that's super interesting. I think there's some rivalries that's usually like,
great
oh, the
point.
Iron Bowl, the game with Michigan and Ohio State, but it's like
Yeah,
besides the other sports, I don't think it's really that at least like school to school emotional, but Arizona's different. Like they've got the Territorial Cup for football, but they also track literally every sport that they play against each other for the ultimate Territorial Cup. So I think it's a super interesting rivalry from that perspective.
100%. I think that's also because, yeah, both fan bases are such loyal fan bases, and
Yep.
I think it's also because although Arizona has been bad in the past in football and basketball's always been their and best sport that they're good in, they've always kind of even when they've been bad in football, they still have fans that care about it and they
Definitely.
still are always kind of trying to get better and because they have a history of having success just we saw 2 years ago winning 10 plus games in football, so they can get to that level when they're good. Same with Arizona State. We've
Yep.
seen them have success in football, basketball, so they don't really have a number one sport. So I think that's what sets it apart. And yeah, as soon as you were saying that, yeah, Michigan, Ohio State popped in my head. Teams like Penn State and Ohio State. It's really you really don't find that type of rivalry in multiple sports and I actually could go far to say this is a top three rivalry in college basketball because these teams, when they play each other, these players really hate each other. The fans really, the crowds are always just, whether it's in Tempe or Tucson, it's always a rowdy environment. No matter if the teams are, no matter if Arizona State's normally the worst of the two teams, which this year's the same case, as always, it seems like. But I still expect Hurley to have them ready, him to be going crazy as always, along with that fan
Yep.
base. So, Yeah, this is always a game we circle on the schedule every year when they play each other a couple times, and it's no different now that they're in the Big 12. It's great that this game is still on the schedule, unlike the games against UCLA and others. But Jordan, before we get into the game against BYU coming up this coming Tuesday, I wanted to talk a little bit about recruiting before we get into that game, and there was a major announcement earlier with Elijah Arenas committing to the USC Trojans over teams like Alabama and Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, and others were in the running. And yeah, so what were your thoughts about this, about him not choosing Arizona, about Arizona not landing him when he is at, I see him as on 247 Sports as the seventh best prospect in the 2025 class right now.
Yeah, a lot of people have them as the best shooting guard in the entire class for 2025. I think it's hard because I think oh, it's kind of entirely built into the legacy. Like having Gilbert Arenas as an Arizona guy, I think as the full appeal of like, oh, we need Arenas, like we need to try to get Arenas. And I understand like there's been a lot of at least Arizona hate over right now the coaching staff not being able to secure him because he's a legacy. And so I think they've been getting a lot of heat for that and just some of I think overall the high school recruiting that's kind of been happening in the Tommy Lloyd era. And I think a lot of it is just compared to Sean Miller and how great he was as a recruiter. It felt like every other year there was at least a top five, top 10 kid we'd get, and you'd be a one and done. But I think just the landscape of college basketball is not that. And I think there's not as much weight into having the top recruiting class. And I think it's hard to tie exactly why that is because I think a lot of it stems from I think a lot of people look at COVID and specifically NIL and the transfer portal, all those things kind of almost happening simultaneously. And so that being a possible like reason why that isn't a thing. Like you look at Coach Cal at Kentucky, he was always known for getting those top recruiting classes, and his teams were built by freshmen. And that's one of the things that kind of drove him away from Arkansas is the last 4 years he hadn't been able to win big games with that group. And I know we've
Oh,
even talked.
away from Kentucky to Arkansas.
Yeah, sorry, I said it wrong. But and we've even been talking a little bit about Duke this year. Their team's kind of built pretty much all by freshmen with Colin Knipple and Cooper Flag, who are great players. But college basketball is a completely different thing when you get now we've got fifth year, 6 year guys that you're going to be playing against in the NCAA tournament, and they've been 3, 4, 5, 6 years into programs. I think there's just a lot of differences and a lot of different styles and different coaching that ultimately can kind of um like add more to your side than just having great freshman players. So it's an interesting conversation. I think it sucks from the legacy perspective, but we just live in a completely different era of college basketball that I think Tommy Lloyd has done a fine job in recruiting it through the transfer portal, and he still looks to recruit internationally, which I think that was always a part of his MO at Gonzaga too.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to cover here,
Yeah,
but one of the things you mentioned with Sean Miller is he sets such a high standard, not just for Arizona, but for the whole country, with getting the top freshman in the country every year into Tucson. And he made that his number one priority. He wasn't a big transfer guy, maybe one to two each year tops.
TJ
He didn't
McConnell,
do, yeah,
namely. Yep.
he didn't do that a ton as we've seen, but. So yeah, and it just seems like Tommy Lloyd isn't that kind of doesn't put that much pressure and energy into getting Elijah Arenas, for example. With it seems like he kind of likes to develop the players more and kind of have them for a couple years. A pure example, KJ Lewis, a couple years ago, he was a four-star player. He wasn't a five-star guy. He's here a couple years, builds in the system,
Yep.
and that's kind of seems like that's what Tommy wants more of. Guys like even
Umar
the five,
Ballo,
yeah,
one of those
yeah.
guys.
Umar Ballo was with him throughout Gonzaga and Arizona, and even the 5-star guys he has got were Kylan Boswell and Carter Bryant, who were lower tier 5-star guys that he did have Boswell for multiple years, has Carter Bryant now. It doesn't seem like he'll have Carter Bryant to me even more than 1 year. I think Carter
Yeah.
Bryant, the way he's playing, especially, and his pedigree, and how the draft class looks this year, I see him leaving. I kind of would be surprised if he came back anyway. But I kind of have mixed feelings in when you look at the overall landscape of Tommy Lloyd's recruiting and what he's done through 4 years. I think he's done a good, okay job, but I just don't think he's done good enough, actually. I'm gonna push back to what you kind of said, and you said he did do a real like a good job overall. I don't even know if I would say that. If you look at this, and I said something before we started, the main thing, and you're totally right. The recruiting isn't just high school basketball now. It's like any sport. It's like NBA free agency every year. It's
Yep.
recruiting on the transfer portal every year is a major priority, and it has to be for every coach if you want to win. Because, like you mentioned with Duke, you can't have all freshmen when you want to win. But also, I just don't think he's done a good enough job with high school recruiting. He's done a really good job, I think, in the portal getting Caleb Love. Yes, he gets a lot of slack from people. The highs and lows we talk about all the time. But this team and this program wouldn't be where it's at today, and wouldn't achieve what it did even last year without Caleb Love. When you have a guy that has that type of scoring talent and skill in them, it just makes you a threat every given night. But when you look through these classes, Jordan, it's I was looking through it. In his 4 years, he only has one class in the top 30. Like this is really concerning, actually, to me, really, because when Tommy Lloyd came here, it was that yes, he is a great international recruiter, but also when you do have a Sean Miller that recruits at such a high level, and you're used to top 10 classes, to drop down that far is a big drop off. And I'm not saying I need a couple 5-star top 30 top 20 guys every year, but you need to mix in a couple of those guys, and you need to get more guys in here because it just seems like every year Tommy Lloyd's formula is to get like last year, for example, he got two high school recruits. That it. And this year, that's it too. So far for 2025, he only has two recruits. And that's just not good enough. And as we've seen, the bench and this team is just it's not really deep right now. I know it was a long-winded answer, but do you get where I'm coming from here?
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of it is just kind of how he wants to construct a roster, and I know a lot of coaches nowadays they kind of do the same thing. Like we don't want to pour every single one of our scholarships into incoming freshmen because also at any given moment, any single one of them could either get a huge commitment from a different school with NIL money, like we've seen with football, with Brad Underwood decommitting from LSU to Michigan after he was told, "Hey, we'll give you $10 million if you flip your commitment." So, I as I see it, is that he's not putting all of his chips into one basket, especially when you have things like the transfer portal, who's given us Caleb Love, and so I think evenly dispersing them, I think is smart from an overall roster construction perspective. And at this point, we're kind of talking about also hindsight of what the roster is
Yeah,
now and what it's been the last few years to what it could be even next year. Because
yeah,
that's the thing. If we get three guys all of a sudden that are really angry and really frustrated and want to transfer out, or two guys just quit basketball, then they're really screwed because they're only bringing in two guys. And if you're losing four or five, especially main role players, that's almost impossible. And at that point, you just have to take bets on transfers as opposed to finding the right fit, which I feel like up to this point, I think Tommy Lloyd has done a really good job of finding the right fit for Arizona in the
yeah,
transfer portal. So it's a lot of different moving pieces, and I just think from my perspective, I think as of right now, also it could change next week with an injury or something. But right now, I think he's done a really good job building roster construction and just coaching his team to win in different ways. Like his first year was super guard or forward or wing oriented with Benedict Mathurin. And then Azuolas Tubelis was the best player. Hey, we're gonna give him the ball pretty much every single possession, give him a paint touch, and then the next year, okay, Caleb Love's in. We want a lot of the offense to flow through him and Umar Ballo, and then now it's kind of the same thing with Caleb Love, but it's differently because they don't have a rim protector like Umar Ballo. So, with all that being said, it's a nutty place to be in, and it's just the nuttiness of the landscape, and I think he's done a good job as any really. Like it's hard to also pick out guys that have done a great job. I think maybe Bruce Pearl is one of the few guys I think that like year in and year out has done a great job. But outside of that, like it's hard to look. You look at North Carolina and how much they've been struggling over the last 2 years. That's a big brand. Indiana, they brought in a ton of transfers and they're still losing a bunch of games. So it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, it's very hard to win in college basketball. It's very hard to recruit in college basketball. And kind of as you were just alluding there, this offseason to me is the most critical, and it's probably to me is the most critical of Tommy Lloyd's career so far at Arizona, because I think he could lose three players and they might be his three best players. I think Caleb Love, Carter Bryant, and I think KJ Lewis could leave as well, depending on how he does here at the end. And I think from the second kind of when Caleb Love got here is in the back of my mind, and now it's when since Caleb Love's time's winding down at Arizona, I think I've been thinking about life after Caleb Love because it's going to
Yep.
leave a massive hole, and I think people will start to realize next year whoever steps in that role, obviously they're going to have to get some sort of transfer in here or two or a couple like this past year to try to fill that role. But yeah, it's really different when if say next year you don't have a guy that can consistently, you know, attempt a lot of shots and be a focal point at times on offense like they've had every year that Tommy Lloyd's been here. But Jordan, we'll save the rest of that off-season talk and recruiting and transfer portal stuff for later on in the season, because this season is still in the thick of it. And before we go today, Arizona has one more game on Tuesday night after they play Arizona State. They stay on the road. They're going to BYU. The game's a late one, 9 p.m. local time in Tucson, 11 p.m. on the East Coast. And right now, I do not see a TV network that is broadcasting this right now. So that is unknown until this game kicks or tips off for say on Tuesday. But BYU is also another team. They've been up and down this year. They lost 4 or 5, but they've won three straight. They beat Colorado, Baylor, and Cincinnati, couple team common opponents with Arizona. Recently beat Baylor by 4 in OT. So have a common win there. What do you think about this matchup? And do you think Arizona could potentially this week turn their win streak from 3 to 5 games?
I think they can. I think it'll be a hard fought game. Provo, they really show out for their Cougars, and I think BYU also is just kind of a sports oriented school from top to bottom, and it feels like they just kind of compete at everything they do. And this BYU team right now is pretty good. I watched that Baylor game, and they played really well, especially for what we've seen as Baylor can do and how guard oriented they are. I think BYU is super balanced, so I think it'll be a fun game. And I think it'll be a good matchup for Arizona though. But I do think our backcourt, like we've been talking about with Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, I think they're a little more experienced, and so I think they're gonna need to lead Arizona if they're gonna be able to go into Provo and get a win.
Yeah, BYU led by two older players, Richie Sanders, Traven Nell. They both shoot 43% from three, so I think that's going to be a big factor if they could slow those two guys down. Be aggressive from the 3-point line and defend them there. I think Arizona could find success because this team, yeah, I just don't think they're that deep this year. I do agree they do have a great home court atmosphere there. But yeah, I think Arizona has the advantage here. I'm gonna go with Arizona winning this game by I'm gonna go by 8 points in this game. I think Arizona wins both of these games on the road, and then they come back to face number 22 Texas Tech the following week. What do you think? What's your score prediction against BYU?
Yeah, I think it'll be a little closer, especially of just kind of some of the tiredness they're going to have from a big rivalry game against ASU. I think that's a tough turnaround to go from that to go up to Provo against a good BYU team that's right now right in the middle of the thick of the Big 12. I think Arizona wins, but I think it'll be a little closer, right around 5 points.
Yeah, they're not facing the two best teams by record, one may say, but two great environments they will be in. First stop, Tempe this Saturday, 11 p.m. local time, 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and then Tuesday night, 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 p.m. local time. They head to face BYU. But that's all we're going to have for you today. I'm Ryan Wall. He's Jordan Pollock. And until